All right, let's dive right in. We're about to tackle, well, millennia of Indian political thought. I know, it's a huge, complex history, but our mission here is to make it clear, to make it navigable, and hopefully really fascinating for you. Okay, so look at this. Dharmshastra, Kautilya, Gandhi, Ambedkar. This is a pretty formidable list of names and texts, right? We've got everything from ancient legal traditions to modern political thinkers. And seeing them all thrown together like this, yeah, it can feel a little overwhelming. I get it. So the big question is, where do you even begin? It's a totally fair question. Staring at a list like this is kind of like looking at a map with no landmarks, isn't it? It's just a jumble of names. How are we supposed to find our way through all of this? But what if we change our whole approach here? Instead of seeing this as some long list you have to memorize, what if we started treating these names like coordinates on a map? What if we could use them to actually chart a course through this incredible intellectual history? And that's exactly what we're going to do. That's our mission. We are going to transform this list into an intellectual map. We're not just looking at names, we're plotting them as key locations, as landmarks in a huge, sprawling landscape of ideas. Okay, so the first thing any good map needs is a sense of scale, right? And just look at this timeline. We are talking about a journey that kicks off in the ancient era, moves right through the medieval sultanate, navigates all the complexities of the British era, and then lands us smack in the middle of independent India. The scope here is, well, it's absolutely breathtaking. All right, every map has to have a starting point. So let's begin our journey right at the bedrock, the ancient and medieval foundations that really everything else is built on. So here we are, our first cluster of landmarks on the map. You can think of these as the foundational pillars of early Indian thought. These are the thinkers and texts that were grappling with the big, timeless questions, What is justice? What does the ideal society look like? What is the job of a ruler, really? Let's take Dharmashastra, for example. Now, this isn't just one book. It's a whole tradition of texts about law, ethics, and duty. A great way to think of it is like the operating system or the source code for classical Indian law. It's the foundational logic that really shaped so many of the debates about social order that came later. But here's the thing about foundations. They're meant to be built on, and sometimes they're meant to be challenged. So our map now takes us to a new region, an age of reform, a time when all those ancient ideas were put under the microscope, questioned, and in some cases, totally reimagined. And this is where we meet a really fascinating group of reformers. You have figures like the mystic poet Kabir, who just took a sledgehammer to religious dogma. Then there's the pioneering feminist Pandita Ramabai, fighting for women's rights. You've got the spiritual leader Swami Vivekanand, who reinterpreted Hinduism for a modern world, and the radical social critic Periyar, who went right after the caste system. They're all so different, but they were all driven by this common fire, this need to reform the social and religious order of their day. Now, happening at the same time, a totally new idea was starting to take root: nationalism. You had thinkers like Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Sri Aurobindo, and Rabindranath Tagore, and they started to talk about India in a new way. It wasn't just a geographical place anymore. They were articulating a vision of India as a unified nation with its own unique cultural soul and a shared political destiny. And that leads us directly into the most dynamic, the most explosive, and maybe the most intensely debated part of our entire map. We're talking about the 20th century and the epic intellectual struggle to define what a modern, independent India should actually be. This is where we meet the heavyweights, the key architects, each with their own competing blueprint for the nation. We're talking Gandhi, Ambedkar, Savarkar, and Nehru. Each one had a powerful and often completely different vision for India's future. And I mean, the stakes, they could not have been higher. Just look at this contrast. It really shows you the depth of the debate. On one hand, you have Gandhi's vision, a bottom-up transformation built on moral force and village autonomy. On the other hand, you have Ambedkar's vision, a top-down approach using constitutional law to achieve social justice, with the annihilation of caste being absolutely essential. And here's the crucial point, the main takeaway. There was never just one single unified vision for modern India. There were many, and they were all in competition. And believe me, the conversation was even broader than that. Our map has to make room for other powerful voices. You've got the poetic vision of Muhammad Iqbal, the hardcore communism of M.N. Roy, the democratic socialism of Lohia and Narayan, and the cultural nationalism of Dyan Dayal Upadhyaya.
Every single one of them added another vital, complex layer to this huge debate over India's identity.
Okay, so we've charted our map, we've placed our landmarks, but now we come to the most important point of this entire explainer. This map, it's not a historical relic. It's not something to hang on a wall and forget about. This intellectual landscape is still being actively fought over right now as we speak. I mean it. These are not just names in a history textbook. They're ideas, they're arguments, they're big disagreements. They are alive and kicking. You can hear their echoes in Parliament, you see them on the news every night, you feel them in public protests. The fundamental questions they were asking back then about identity, justice, and power, those are the exact same questions India is wrestling with today. You know, we started with 20 names and traditions, but that number, 20, it's not the end of the story. It's the beginning. It represents countless fault lines, countless competing visions that define this living, breathing, and nonstop debate over the very soul of a nation.
Look, our goal here wasn't to give you all the answers. That would be impossible. Our goal was just to give you a map, a way to start navigating this incredibly rich territory for yourself. And now that journey of exploration, it's all yours.
Because when you think about it, this is just one map for one nation's intellectual history. And that leaves us with a final, pretty provocative question to think about. Whose ideas from the past and the present are the ones that draw the lines of your world?